We are currently in this series, When Life is Unfair. Has anybody in this room besides me had a moment of unfairness recently? Raise your hand. Oh, well, see, I'm in great company. Okay, so a lot of us have had those moments where we've said to ourselves, man, this is so unfair. Life is so hard. Or, I didn't see that coming. Or, why am I facing this? You know, in the book of Ruth is where we're at scripturally. I invite you to turn to chapter 3 this morning. We're going to see how God intervened in Ruth's life, as well as Naomi. But now the scene shifts more towards Ruth. And here's the thing. You and I may be in a moment or in a season of difficulty. We may be saying to ourselves privately, maybe even right now in this room, you may be saying to yourself, man, is this ever going to end? One of the neat things about Scripture is you and I get the privilege of seeing firsthand as we read. We see how God worked in all of these different lives. We get to read the end story of their lives. You and I cannot possibly know the end story of our life here on earth. We can try as hard as we want. We can call those 800 numbers if you want to pay the fee. And somebody out there, will tell you what they think your life is going to be like. We try everything in this world to figure it out. The point is, just like Ruth and Naomi, you and I have to choose every day. You have to choose today, okay? Right now, today, am I going to trust God? You see, that is really one of the tangible pieces of evidence in my life that I'm a follower of Jesus Christ, that I am trusting Him as feeble as I feel. And I cannot even begin to imagine how feeble Ruth felt in a foreign country, in a foreign culture, following the God of Israel with her whole heart. She didn't just give lip service to God like so many people do. You know, a lot of people give lip service to Jesus today. A lot of people say, oh yes, I love Jesus. Yes, Jesus, lead and guide me. But what they're saying in essence is, yes, I like that, but down inside, I don't want Him to really call the shots of my life. I want to still be in control. And Ruth took it to a level to where Jesus Himself calls us to go. She gave her life to God, to the Lord Jesus Christ. She said, in essence, I am all in. And that is where we're at. Ruth is all in. And so we come to a place in the book of Ruth, halfway through, starting at chapter 3, verse 1, and we're going to look at how God's unconditional redemption played out in Ruth's life. And I hope as we look at this today that you yourself, as I have, I've been rereading this again, over and over again. I love how God is so unconditional with His love. He gives it to us, even when we despise it, even when we ignore it, even when we play games with it. His love is there. So jump in with me, if you would, chapter 3, verse 1. Let's just see what transpired. Now, this chapter is so cool, okay? This is really out-of-the-box stuff, okay? If you've never read this, hang on. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to Ruth, my daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you? Is not Boaz our relative? If you know anything, if you were with us in chapter 2, Boaz became a player in this story. He is a distant relative of Naomi's. And in Jewish culture, relatives always looked out for relatives. You need to understand that. They were there for them through thick and thin, and especially for women. In fact, God said to families, it is your responsibility to caretake a widow. So, that's the setting. with whose young women you were. She was out in the field. She ended up in Boaz's field. See, he is winnowing barley. Winnowing. He is sifting it. He's not just harvesting it. Now he's separating it from all the other junk, okay? And they didn't have machines in that day, so they had to do everything by hand. And they had a place dedicated. It's called the threshing floor. I'm sorry, it's not cement like so many have today. It was a dirt area dedicated to harvesting and separating and filtering through to get the nuggets of grain to store them so that people could have food, all right? So Boaz and his crew, they are winnowing. That's the old word for harvesting and threshing and sifting through. They would actually take it and throw it up in the air and all that good stuff. And so Boaz was there that night at the threshing floor. Wash therefore, and anoint yourself, and put on your cloak, and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. Here's the scene. Ruth was beckoned by and told by Naomi. She was counseled. She said, here's what you need to do. And so Ruth followed her plan, Naomi's plan. She was to get herself fixed up, cleaned up, go to the floor, go to that area, but wait until it's really dark so no one will notice you. And wait until he has eaten, he has drank, he's had his fill, he's now ready to lay down for a little while and get some sleep, okay? And we continue on. But when he lies down, observe the place where he is, where he's at, then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do. Okay. This is like, whoa. Ruth had never heard of anything like this. To us today, the first thought in our mind is, Naomi told Ruth to go and set herself up so that Boaz would fall in love with her and little things would happen. You know, that's usually what's in our mind, okay? But that wasn't the intent. The intent was for her to go there and present herself to find out if Boaz would be the one, if Boaz would be the man of the family who would come to her aid, who would welcome her and then take her as his wife and provide what Israel called covering. In other words, an umbrella of protection for the rest of her life by being her husband. This is so cool. So Ruth, a foreigner who had never heard of such a thing, by faith trusted Naomi. Don't lose that. You see, part of faith, in fact, God tells us in the book of Hebrews, which was written many generations later in the New Testament, the writer of Hebrews writes all about this, about faith. And the writer of Hebrews makes this statement at chapter 11, verse 1. Faith is the substance of things hoped for and the conviction of that which I cannot see. Ruth was displaying faith. She trusted God. She trusted Naomi, her mother-in-law, that Naomi would counsel her and direct her to do something that would not be hurtful, that would not bring harm to her, that would not cause her reputation to be struck down. So here's Ruth, sneaking in. It's nighttime, no flashlight. She sneaks in. She discovers the threshing area. She keeps looking, and she finally discovers Boaz. And he's sound asleep. He has eaten, he has drank, he has worked himself to death. As all the other workers, they're all laying down, sleeping, and Ruth comes up to him and lays down, okay? Naomi said, just go and uncover his feet. Don't ask me to explain that. I was not there. I sleep with socks on. You thought you were coming to church and you didn't have to hear something about pastor's socks. But the reality is, that was what's going on. Boaz was sound asleep. She takes the covering, it must have been a large covering, kind of a quilt, a blanket type of thing, and lifted it up, and there were his feet, and she was to lay down, which, by the way, happened. That was something that happened in Israel, okay? But we go on, and she replied to her mother-in-law, I will do what you say. I will do it. Let me ask you a personal question as we're kicking this off. When God directs, do you respond? And then, how do you respond? See, Ruth had no knowledge, no understanding. She had not grown up in this part of the world. She knew nothing. And her mother-in-law says, go, lay down at the feet of the guy, lift the blanket up, lay down, it'll all be taken care of. And she said, okay. How often do we say to God, okay, yeah, I'll do it. We're going to learn more about that. So she went down to the threshing floor and did as her mother-in-law had commanded her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. Then she came softly and uncovered his feet and lay down. There they are. Total blackness. Boaz sound asleep, dreaming of all the money he's going to make from his grain. Ruth doing something she had never done in her life. Really? I wish I could have been there. I wish I could have known the mind of Ruth as she snuck into that area and laid down and lifted his covering and laid down at the foot of his sleeping area. I would love to know what was going through her mind. But she did it. At midnight, the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman by his feet. Guys, wouldn't that be a little startling to you? If you were sound asleep out camping after a long day of hunting, and you had worked hard, and you had climbed those hills, and you had forged those rivers, and you had stalked those animals, and you ended up with a nice little kill, and you were back in camp, and you stretched out in your nice little sleeping bag next to that wonderful little heater, and you were sound asleep, enjoying and dreaming about all the fun you've been having, and in the middle of the night you wake up and there's a woman sleeping at your foot. Yeah, this is cool. This is like, whoa. This is like, whoa. What is God doing? Okay? This woman is single. She's a foreigner. And she's sleeping at the foot of this guy's bed? Come on. He says, who are you? He had no clue who it was. I mean, come on. It's total dark. And she answered, I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer. That is the Hebrew terminology for, Boaz, would you marry me? She asked him to marry her. Are you the guy that's going to be my redeemer? Are you the one who's going to marry me? Please. do so. That would be like a woman coming up to you, the woman that is now your wife, for those of you who are married, saying to you, would you marry me? Now, I'm not going to ask for hands this morning. How many in this room, man or woman, have done that very thing? Men, you've been the recipient of a woman who said to you, I want you to marry me. Women, have you ever done that? This is so foreign to our thinking in our world today. It doesn't typically happen that way, although in our new generation, in our new culture, hey, anything is about to happen. Okay? So, maybe in some twisted way, we can kind of get an idea. But here was this young woman who had been schooled and taught by Naomi the truth of God, to follow him with your whole life. And Naomi says, you go lay down, and then here's what you say. And so she said it. And Boaz responded, may you be pleased, or may you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. Boaz was older. You need to understand. Boaz was a distant relative, but he was older than Ruth. Possibly even a generation older. We're not sure, but he was older. And his response celebrates and affirms Ruth's determination to honor God with her life. See, unbeknownst to Ruth, between the lines, Boaz had been paying attention to Ruth for some time. He had been watching. He had been observing. He knew the lifestyle of Ruth more than she ever imagined. And he had seen her in the marketplace. He had seen her in the field. He had seen her in town. He had seen her in a number of places. And the thing that gripped his heart was the genuineness of this young woman. And one of the things he sensed was her commitment to Jesus Christ, to God. Do people sense that in our lives? Do people who mingle around us, who engage with us, who come in and out of our life on a daily basis, people who we would call friends, people that we go to school with, people that we work with, people that we live among here in this community, would they recognize us as followers of God, of disciples of Jesus Christ? Would they see in us out there what we proclaim we are in here? It is so easy for us to be faithful to Jesus, loving Jesus, when we're in the nice, comfortable surroundings of these four walls. But what about when we walk out of here? When we're out there? See, Ruth just simply lived the life that she said she would live by following God with her whole heart. She had no idea that Boaz was as knowledgeable about her as he was. His statement makes it very clear. May you be blessed in this last thing as you were in the first thing. What was the first thing? She came to Israel. She lived with Naomi. She made a decision. Your God's going to be my God. A lot of people today in 21st century America have made lip service commitments to Jesus Christ. I call them lip service. And the reason I do is because a lot of people say yes, but not as many people say yes every day in their life. And Boaz noted this, so he goes on. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you have asked. For all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. All the ladies in this congregation, would you say it with me? A worthy woman. Come on, ladies. Yes. You know what that means? A woman of excellence. The word worthy means excellent. What does excellent mean? What is he inferring here? He's inferring your reputation is excellent. Your life is excellent. Your life is being lived in a way that others take notice. You know, listen, sometimes all of us, whether we're men or women in this congregation, doesn't matter. Every one of us have to live our life every day. Today, if tomorrow comes, again, and on and on. And sometimes you may be in this room this morning and privately you think, my life isn't really accomplishing great things. Yesterday I was at the men's conference and the No Regrets, and their theme yesterday. How many guys were there? What was the theme? Okay, one more time, guys. Yell it out. Relentless. And I listened to all the speakers up there. Now, you have to know, I'm a pastor, okay? I'm supposed to speak every week, that kind of thing, you know? And I sat and listened to those guys. Okay, I'm going to confess. Can you handle it? I was sitting there at times thinking to myself, man, those guys are so good. They are so awesome. Man, I wish I could be like that. And then the Lord's Spirit had to remind me, David, I have you where I have you for a reason. Be grateful. You're doing what I've asked you to do. Don't compare. Sit and learn. And maybe you're here this morning and sometimes you feel that way about yourself. Well, listen, my friend. A worthy person is a person of excellent character. He didn't refer to her facial features. He didn't refer to the shape of her body. He did not refer to anything external. He referred to the worthiness of who she was as a young woman. That's what I think God would have you and you and you and you and me aspire for. Are we willing to be worthy? Several things I learned from all of this in chapter 3. We're only halfway through, but that's okay, because chapter 3 has so much to it. I'm only taking you to verse 11 today, okay? And we'll jump forward next week. We'll pick it up again next week. But there are several thoughts, several lessons for me, several principles that I'd like to leave you with, okay, this morning. The first one is, I have to, and you have to know that God's intervention can sometimes be unconventional. Let me be honest with you. To me, that scenario with Boaz and Ruth is so unconventional. To me, as a man growing up in America, when I met Sheila, there was no way I was going to have her ask me. I'm a dude, you know? That's unconventional in my world. I grew up in a generation where women didn't, well, the women I knew wouldn't do it, but that's for another day. I asked Sheila. But here's the thing I've learned ever since that time of being so young. Through my life, I have learned this principle. God can be so unconventional at times in reaching into my life and accomplishing for me what I thought could never happen. And there have been times God has used, in my world, unconventional means. As I look back on Ruth, God used the circumstances of Elimelech and Naomi coming to Moab. That is totally out of the box because they were starving. and they show up in a foreign country. God then used Naomi's one son, who married Ruth, to bring Ruth into the family. Then, out of the blue, her husband dies. Naomi's son dies. I mean, whoa, that is like tragic. That is like big time tragic. And you have seen the news, as I've seen the news down through the years and months, where newlyweds, something tragic has happened, and one of them dies. And we just can't seem to get our minds around that. And that happened to Ruth. And out of the blue, she is left husbandless. And then she decides, I'm going to follow Naomi. Why? Because Naomi has what I desperately want. And she ends up in a foreign country. And then she meets a distant relative of hers, which, by the way, was normal in Israel. True Israelites, true Jewish people of that ancient time, would not marry out of their family. Rarely. And here's Ruth. And Ruth then says something that I don't think she dreamed up on her own. I think mother-in-law had something to do with it by telling her, this is what you do, and if he says this, you might consider saying that. And so she did, and he responds. I love how God works in my life. He always seems to take a unique way to bring me through situations that I wonder, how in the world am I going to get by? How am I going to get through it? And God always. Listen, my friend, if you're here this morning and you're not trusting Jesus Christ every single day in your life like that, I beg you to allow him to be the one who leads and directs your life, step by step by step. Lesson number 2, principle number 2, I have to take a step forward when God points the way. God, listen, some people get the idea, I'll just wait for God to direct me. And God's over here going, I've directed you. Wake up. I am not going to make you take that step. And a lot of people in the Christian community think, I can't step until God forces me to step. God will make my foot move. No, God will not make your foot move any more than he'll make your heart move. Even though he's in your heart and in your life, you and I have to decide by trusting. God says, David, go this way. This is the way. This is the way I want you to take. I have to decide if I'm going to step. Even the psalmist understood that in Psalm 119. God illuminates the way, but only enough for me to take a step. And I tell you, there are a lot of people, I think, who are suffering, hurting, and holding themselves back from walking in step with Jesus every day because they're unwilling to take a step that they cannot already see the end result. My friend, I would not be in this room today if I had been unwilling to take a step with Jesus when I had no idea how it would turn out. You and I have to be willing to take a step. Let me ask you a personal question this morning. As you sit there, I have no way of knowing all the details that go on in your life, any more than you can know all the details of my life. But I want you to think about this. Are you taking steps of trust in your life? How many things or how many parts of your life does Jesus want to lead and direct, but you're unwilling to take the step in the direction he's opening? You know, in this world today, here in America, here in Oregon, here in Umatilla County, right in this room in Hermiston, too often we want to know how it's going to play out before we go. And Jesus says, follow me. Are you willing to take a step right now? In a moment, Pastor Chris is going to lead us in a closing song. I'm going to ask you to do something this morning. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands or anything like that. That's the typical thing that we do, isn't it? I'm going to ask you to take a step. Here's what I'm going to ask you to do, and it doesn't matter who you are, what stage of life you are, where you're on the journey of life. If you do not have Jesus Christ as your Savior, I would ask you this morning, take a step and come this way. You say, why do I have to? I don't know. It's just something about taking a step. I remember many years ago, I took a step in front of a congregation. I was sitting with my parents on a Sunday night, and I was listening to the sermon. But God's Spirit prompted my mind and my heart. And as an 8-year-old, I took a step. I stepped out. Whoever it was, I can't even remember, didn't ask if I would raise my hand. They just simply said, step up here. And I stepped. And it changed my life forever. So if you don't know Jesus personally, I invite you this morning, take a step while we're singing. But maybe you're here this morning, you know Jesus. But you haven't been taking the kind of steps that you know and God knows and Jesus knows that you're unwilling to take. Are you willing this morning to take a step? In a moment, we're all going to stand. Some of us are going to be up here. We're ready and willing and able to step with you and assist you and pray with you if you want. But are you willing, as Ruth was, to take a step? Stand with us if you would. It is. Fight my battles. It's how I fight. This is how I fight my battles. This is how I fight my battles. This is how I fight my battles. This is how I fight. I'm surrounded by you. I'm surrounded by you. My battle. Go ahead, take a step. This is how I fight my battles. Fight my battles. This is how I fight my battles. This is how I fight. Listen, you're invited. As everybody's going that way, please feel free to step this way. We would love to encourage you and pray with you. Have a great day.